viewers from around the world. I'm Kristen Schwartz, licensed midwife and MC here at Gold. Here at Gold, we're preparing for our brand new conference titled Birth and Beyond. That's coming up here next month. And I'm always looking forward to meeting our speakers for our conference. And with me here today is Emily Blackmoon. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Ani, how are you today?
I am well. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Really good.
Emily, so you're one of our speakers, and I think you have a very interesting background. And before we go into your presentation, we want to know a little bit about you. First of all, where are you in the world?
So I'm located in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I am a registered social worker with the province of Ontario in Canada. I am a mixed person of both settler and Indigenous ancestry. So I come from a French, a British, and Algonquin ancestry from the Ottawa Valley. And I do holistic and integrative based psychotherapy. So I really provide support for clients, and especially for new parents and birth parents who are going through their experience and sort of navigating their mental health in a way that sort of brings in a critical lens around things like the societal conditioning, racism, oppression, how that sort of social conditioning informs our mental health. I am a Gestalt practitioner, which is a type of experiential and body-based psychotherapy that's very much around, what is sort of arising in the moment as in terms of feelings and emotions. And then I also do an Indigenous approach to psychotherapy. And when we're talking about Indigenous approaches, some of those key aspects is talking about things like intergenerational trauma and intergenerational resilience, and as well as connection to ancestors. And I think that's a really big part of the work that I do with birth parents and with parents who are just navigating their experience. And in this presentation, there's quite a bit of that we speak about.
hmm so you also you just mentioned that you work also with with the indigenous urban communities there, especially during their birth journey. So tell us a little bit about that. Um, you're talking about the ancestors bringing that in. Um, how does that show us a little bit, or tell us a little bit how that looks like in your practice?
Sure. So one of the core teachings, many Indigenous communities have very different teachings on
Mhm.
life and death and birth and rites of passage. But a very common one that we find, especially in North America, is the idea that pregnancy and postpartum are times of ceremony, right?
Mm,
And that's a
mm,
time where the birth parent is in ceremony, and the time when there's a real sacredness to that experience, right? That birth
mm.
parent it becomes that portal by which they bring that baby in from the spirit world and bring them out into this physical world, right? And are therefore then charged with the responsibility of caring and guiding this infant. So when I'm working with birth parents, we really try to ground them in that knowledge, right? That this isn't just, you kind of making sure you get to your obstetrician's appointment and making sure you meet with your midwife and all the beautiful things that you all have to
Right.
do that are so vitally important. This is really about your relationship to this journey of pregnancy and postpartum. It's how do you sort of frame this in the context of not only your life, because it is such a life-changing thing, but the generations behind you, right? Your own birth parents,
Mm,
your grandparents, your great grandparents, that you have generations of folks behind you, no matter where we come from in the world, where folks have been, through these birth journeys and these postpartum journeys, sometimes really beautifully and in supported ways, sometimes traumatically, right? You're talking about,
mhm.
my own family has some traumatic experience with regards to birth. So I think all those things that not only inform our experience, but our ancestors' experiences
Right.
are going to inform our postpartum experience, right?
Yeah.
So it's being able to really ground and root oneself in that knowledge so
Hmm.
that especially when we're navigating into postpartum mental health, right? So
Yeah.
we're coming up with issues of, say, for example, depression and anxiety and um, you know the challenges with that we're really able to root ourselves in a very holistic way so that we can navigate those challenges. So that it's not just, a question of mental health, but it's also your spiritual or
Right.
religious or existential mental health, your emotional, your intellectual, and your physical.
Absolutely. You said something there that is sounded so beautiful when you said, yeah, you're bringing that baby from the spirit world into, onto earth, and then you have you take on this beautiful responsibility to care for this baby, and that it got me thinking because we are often so disconnected, right? We're focusing on the physical aspects. Is what you mentioned, is your baby healthy? You're going to the obstetrician, to the midwife, and having all that in check. We're checking on the baby. We're checking on the birthing person. But further than that, we don't go much into, uh, emotions and spirituality and this whole holistic. There is this whole other world behind it. And it feels like when you talk to me, Emily, it sounds like you're poking all these doors open, and
Well, that's the hope, right? Is that, you see in many different ways. We see, especially in the context of mental health, we're really
yeah.
seeing this deepening of the process, right? Because in some ways birth has gone so much into sort of a Western medical model, and there's wonderful
Hmm.
things about that, right? That's provided safety and health and support to birth parents.
Hmm.
But we've in some ways become sometimes a little bit divorced from the
Yeah.
humanity, the cultural, and the existential gifts that we carry, right? And so
Right.
that's the hope, is that we can maybe do that in a more integrative way. We can have that Western approach
Mhm.
to the keeping birth parents safe and healthy, and we can do that somatic and psychological piece as well.
Absolutely. It sounds wonderful. Now, you mentioned also connecting with the, ancestors, seeing what the history is there. w- do you often talk to, I mean, looking back at your clients and also the families you serve, are there many that come to you and saying like, "Yeah, Emily, that sounds really great, but I really don't know much about my ancestry, my, maybe, yeah, I know my parents, but then, I don't know much beyond it." Are these families still able to connect? How would that look like?
Yeah, so I've worked with a whole variety of clients where, say, for example, especially in the Indigenous communities in North
Hmm.
America, when we look at their ancestors, there's been impacts of racism, residential
Yeah.
school experience, 60 scoop, children being removed from care. So there's a lot of trauma, and it can be very painful to reconnect with what were your grandparents experiencing at that time. And then
Right.
other folks who said, yeah, I've never thought about that, and that I
Mm-hmm.
actually feel I don't have a lot of information about that. And so one of the things that I always try to support people with is, when we do an existential and holistic approach to therapy, we start to realize that we can actually develop relationship with our ancestors within us when we acknowledge that we are a descendant, when we acknowledge that they did and do exist, right? And we feel that deeply within ourselves, right? We really connect the body to the mind and the heart and the soul, and recognize that in the same way, when you think about, if you have children or grandchildren or your future descendants, how much you would care and love and maybe even want to be remembered. Those people behind you felt the same way, right? We share a humanity in that way. And so when you recognize the humanity of your ancestors, you start to kind of recognize, for most part, they didn't want to be forgotten either. And
Mm.
they so many different cultures, indigenous or non-indigenous, really believe in the caring of ancestors. So I think this is a way, through kind of more of a meditative process, that we try to encourage our patients and our clients to do that.
Meditative process. That sounds wonderful to me. Um, Tell us now about the presentation. It's titled "Protecting the Sacred." I love that title. Honoring birth parents through planning for the postpartum journey, and that journey, that postpartum journey, that is so important, right? I mean,
Mhm.
for many families, especially if they never had children or there are not many children in the community that they saw how this postpartum journey is, many families often feel kind of isolated in that postpartum time. So tell us a little bit about your presentation, and it sounds like this holistic approach uh, be very beneficial for the postpartum period for these families.
That's the hope, right? And especially during COVID, right? We
Yeah.
are in, my heart goes out for the birth parents and the birth workers right now, because it is such a deeply isolating time.
Hmm.
So what we're really trying to do is to encourage, you know, folks who are vulnerable right now, and I would say birth parents, while very strong and very powerful, are also very vulnerable. And so we want to be able to encourage a really holistic plan into, what we call the fourth trimester, right? Because it really is, your baby's still, fresh from the spirit world. It's still so new. You're new, especially if this is your first baby. You're like, what am I doing? And you're trying to existentially sort of shift yourself from being, just you, or just you and your partner, to now you and this child. So what this presentation is about is we are going to be looking at, the sort of classic medical mental health definitions of postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, right? Or what they call, those challenges. But we're also going to be looking at how do we take a holistic lens to planning for support. So being a social worker, we're very big in doing preventative rather than responsive, right? We want to plan to be able to support, mental health and well-being as much as possible. So the hope for, the folks who attend is, especially if they're working with patients or clients who are maybe in their second or third trimester, start to help those people that you're working with, sort of plan ahead, right? If you are coming from a cultural, a religious, an existential, or spiritual practice, what teachings can we take from that would support your birth experience? If you have questions around your physical health, what should we let you know, right? There's so many times, and I'm sure you've experienced too, as a midwife, we've had parents come over being like, nobody told me I was gonna
Yes,
feel
yes.
this, or nobody told me this was gonna happen to my body. Like, we want to bring about a lot of those questions and have those discussions maybe sooner rather than later, so it doesn't kind of hit birth parents like a pile of bricks, right? Like they're
Yeah.
and already it will. We already know, just
Mhm.
because a child is so intensive, and so beautiful, and so incredible, that will be really intense experience. But we're just trying to create a bit more of a holistic support plan, I think.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much,
You're
Emily
welcome.
Blackmoon, for
Gosh.
sitting here with me chatting. I am so looking forward to this presentation. It will be so insightful. I had a little peek for our listeners here at the presentation. We had a little chat. So, you, our listeners and viewers, if you come to the presentation and the conference, you are in for a treat. You will surely enjoy it. So, thank you so much, Emily, for
Thank
being here.
you.
And
Miigwech.
and for our listeners here, you can comment below. And if you would like to check out this presentation and the other presentations in the conference, we invite you to go to goldbirthandbeyond.com. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.